everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you one last time for Stories from Science. It's hard to believe our series is actually going to wrap up with this episode. So over the last many weeks, we've taken a journey through stories from medicine, blunders in science, tragic heroes. These are all the different episodes, stolen science, accidental discoveries, and a topic dear to my heart, of course, women in science. And then we looked at the issue of mental health and well-being and genius with tormented genius. And of course, nothing is ever complete until there are controversies. So there was an episode on controversy in science. And we even took the side road and looked at weird but true stories. So what stories are there left? We've examined the past thousands of years, scholars across all over the world. That's why we have the globes with us. So right through space and time. So I thought a nice note to end our final episode, what stories would we look at today, would be stories of inspiration. So people in science who have inspired us. And of course, the list is very long. Not only that, many of them have been covered already. Most of the people we looked at in women in science were so inspiring, like Kalpana Chawla. We had so many people. And then when we looked at tragic heroes, Ramanujan, the mathematician, all of them were great stories of inspiration. So I thought today, our final episode, we will cover a couple of scientists who we didn't really pay too much attention to throughout the entire series, and yet they are extremely inspiring. So if you don't know the pattern by now and you are my guest as we go through the episode today, I am going to make a statement and you are going to decide if it is, yes, you know it by now, right? By heart. Is it true or is it false? All right, so keep in mind what our theme is for today. And the theme is stories of inspiration. And who did we not pay too much homage to in this entire series? And yet, if you ask anyone, is there a scientist that you know, whether the person is in any field or not, or who's a genius? And I'm sure, right, it doesn't take too long for someone to say, Einstein, of course, right? So, and that's going to be our first story, okay? It's going to be about Einstein. So what's our statement? This is our statement. And you have to decide if it is true or is it false. Einstein was speaking fluently from age of 2. Okay, so is that true or false? So let's dig in and then we will figure out if that's true or false. So who was Albert Einstein? It's almost like who doesn't know him? You know, if you put the word genius, if you plug in genius on Google, very high chance it's Albert Einstein's image that will come up. Well, it turns out, right, so we're going to start in his childhood. So pretty quickly, we are going to solve that puzzle for today, which is Einstein was speaking fluently at age 2. All right, so we know he's a genius. So clearly, he must have been a brilliant student and a genius prodigy and a child that was doing amazing things. Well, the only way I can move forward is actually by giving you the answer so that we could move forward. So Einstein was speaking fluently from age 2. It actually turns out to be false. And the reality is that Albert Einstein didn't start speaking in sentences till he was age 5. Just think today that if in your family or your child is not speaking until they're about 5, we would be so livid. We are getting therapists. They start school at age 3. And talking about when they start school, he didn't start school till he was about 6. And I'm sharing a little personal note with you here. Perhaps a little known fact about myself as a scientist, I didn't start school till I was age 7. All right, so you get to catch up. You do catch up. So Albert Einstein did not speak properly until he was age 5. And why is he such an inspiration? So his earliest thoughts that he shared with us is that when he was 5, his father gave him a compass, and he looked at it and he wondered what makes it move. And that's the start of the sign of genius. And it's a theme that I want us to keep in mind for today's episode, what happens in our childhood and what we are exposed to. So then Einstein continues. He actually goes to school. He does not do very well. His father was told by a teacher, it doesn't matter what he does, he will never amount to anything. Right? A teacher said about Albert Einstein, he will never amount to anything. You couldn't be more wrong, right? When it comes to that. And he actually ended up being a school dropout at age 15. He left school and was teaching himself. And the several years beyond that was always troubling for Albert Einstein. He struggled to get into different programs. He was doing very well in physics and mathematics, but that's not all it takes, right? But other subjects, he was just failing miserably, and he could not get into any programs. Finally, he does graduate, and he has a degree, he has a PhD, and he could not find any work. He wanted to get married, but you need some kind of income, right? And he would be tutoring, the great Albert Einstein, and he would get fired from the tutoring jobs. So he was really struggling. And finally, a friend's father, right? And we all call up people we know. It's like, hey, do you know of any jobs? Can you get my child a job? So his father's friend actually got him a job as a clerk in a patent office. So here's the great Albert Einstein. Now, how many patents really come in, right, on a regular basis? So this is when life gives you a lemon. You make lime juice, right? Rather than, we don't really drink lemonade, right? We like our lime juice in Trinidad. And the job allowed him a lot of spare time. And the year was 1905. And it's called the Year of Wonder. And Albert Einstein produced his most monumental work in that single year, employed as a clerk in a patent office. Tell me that's not inspiring. Tell me it's not inspiring to be told that you will never amount to anything. All right, so when those work came to the attention of scientists and they saw the genius there, well, finally he got employed as a professor, as he should have been up front, and he went on to get the Nobel Prize in physics for something called photoelectric effect. Don't worry about the technicalities. He's most well known for something called relativity, but that's not what he got the Nobel Prize in physics for. And so how's that for an inspiring story? And today it's thought, in retrospect, there are people who wonder if Albert Einstein was not autistic as a child, and that's why there was that delay in talking. But it didn't keep him back, did it? So I'd like to end his story with a quote from him, and he says, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer." And if there are young people in high school or anywhere, or anyone who's a lifelong learner, that's a marvelous lesson in that statement. It's not about how smart or how brilliant someone is, but it's about staying with the problems and getting up and going again. All right. So our first statement of whether he could speak fluently at age 2 is actually false. He could not. Okay. I'm now going to move to a next story of inspiration. Another very well-known name, and she has appeared in the segment on women in science. And when you say women in science, again, plug in women in science on Google, boom, you're going to get Marie Curie, right? But I want to focus on a lesser known aspect of what Marie Curie did and who she was. We know she had something to do with radioactivity. And here's the statement. Marie Curie was on the front lines in World War I. Is that true or false? Right? And it's like, I mean, I know from when I teach my students, it's like, wait, she had anything at all to do with the World War? So is that statement true or false? So let me repeat. Marie Curie was on the front lines of the World War I. So who's Marie Curie? A greatly inspiring woman. Well, she came from a very poor family in Poland, and she and her sister made a pact that Marie Curie will work as a governess, as a tutor, and support her sister doing medicine. And when the sister had become employed, she will now support Marie Curie. So they made that pact. And that allowed Marie Curie at a later stage to be able to do what she loved, and which was physics and chemistry. And she went to France and she studied. And what she's known for is, of course, radioactivity. And she remains up till today the only person to get a Nobel Prize in two fields, physics and chemistry, and the first woman to win a Nobel Prize. And the number of women winning Nobel Prizes, even in this era, in the 2020s, is miserably low. Right? Which is why we did a special episode on women in science. So what does that statement have to do with anything? So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, radioactivity had been discovered, and they were dealing with X-rays and things like that. And Marie Curie was right there with her colleagues, front and center in this field. And then the World War I began. Well, she wanted to do all she could to help the war effort and the soldiers. And she was the director of the Red Cross thing, and she developed these little ambulances and really fought to get as many as she could, and they called them Petit Curies, right? Little Curies. And with her daughter, who was just 17 at the time, she and her daughter took these ambulances with portable X-ray units to the front lines of World War I, and there you have your answer. So Marie Curie was on the front lines in World War I is actually true, right? People don't realize her efforts in when it came to medical research, medical efforts, right? With, of course, radioactivity, but in the war at the time. So from her efforts, she trained 150 women. It's estimated she saved 1 million soldiers by using those X-ray machines to locate fractures, shrapnel, and bullets embedded in them. As would almost be predicted, she died of aplastic anemia, a condition due to the amount of radioactivity she was exposed to in researching this, which has gone on to make our lives better. So what an inspiring woman. She took tons of a material called pitch blende to get 1/10 of a gram of radium that's now used in medical research. 1/10 of a gram. All right, so could you imagine how toxic her environment was? So I'm going to end her story and the first segment of our episode today with a quote from her, and it's very inspiring. She says, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." So folks, let's take a break now, and I'm going to see you right back after with more stories of inspiration. Welcome back, folks, right? After that short break we had on stories of inspiration, and we would love to know about more scientists who are sources of inspiration to us. So before the break, we met Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, names that are so very well known. So who are we going to look at next? Perhaps a name you do know. And he is none other than Stephen Hawking. So if any of you are interested in astronomy and physics, you are bound to know that name. And also, if you are a fan of shows like Big Bang Theory, yes, he shows up in that. So who's Stephen Hawking, and what's the statement? We're going to check if it's true or false. So here's the statement. Stephen Hawking married his nurse after his divorce. Okay, so is that true about Stephen Hawking's life, or is it false that he married his nurse after his divorce? All right, so that cues us into the story about Stephen Hawking. So as a child, his father wanted him to do medicine, and we are all very familiar, and even here in Trinidad and Tobago, where most parents encourage their children to either go into the fields of medicine, engineering, or law. And yet there is a vast array of a lot of other fields like physics and astronomy, right? But sometimes they feel like, what jobs are there available in these fields? So he actually went into physics instead and decided, and he went on to get his PhD, and he worked in the field of exploring the behavior of black holes and what's happening in the universe. An interesting fun fact about him is that he was born exactly to the day 300 years after Galileo died, and he died on Einstein's birthday. Just like I said, a little fun fact along the way. Now, this is what's interesting about Stephen Hawking. When he was just about 21, he started to have problems with balance, and he was actually studying, and he was at university at the time, and he went to the doctor. And he was diagnosed with what's called ALS, or motor neuron disease. This, folks, is a debilitating disease which just gets worse and worse, and there is no cure for it. It's a motor disease, meaning that he was going to lose function of movement and of his hands and everything like that, but his mind was not affected, okay? How do you separate the body from the mind? And the doctors told him that, Stephen, maybe 6 months, at best you have 2 years. And he was 21 at the time. So imagine the impact on a person given that sort of news. And he was, as we would expect for anyone, he went into quite a bit of depression, and then eventually he emerged out of it and said that he is going, the power of his mind, he's not going to ignore that, and he will continue. And folks, at age 21, having been told he had at most 2 years to live, Stephen Hawking passed away not too long ago, a couple years ago, at the age of 76. How's that? I mean, just that alone is hope. And it's a story of inspiration, but it's what he did in those years, because bit by bit, he started to completely lose function of his muscles, and he was incapable of speaking. He was confined fully to a wheelchair, and he could not speak or do anything. He had many surgeries. He had just small bits of abilities at one time with his thumb, a little motion in his cheeks and eyebrows. And using that, they developed a software and some machinery that allowed him to talk in a mechanical voice. And with that, Stephen Hawking produced some of the greatest pieces of science that we know. And as I mentioned, if you watch Big Bang Theory, he is in it. He has had his own television series. He wrote many books, right? There was so much that he contributed. And one of the things that he's quite famous for is something called Hawking radiation. And it was so radical that people walked out of his seminar and said, why, Stephen, that's nonsense. And I just recently read, just very recently, it appears that they've been able to verify that Hawking radiation does indeed exist, but lots more research is still needed. So we were sorry to lose Stephen Hawking, but he left such an inspiring story of a human's endeavor to beat the disease that he had and continue to progress in life. So his story, I end with his words, and he says, although I'm severely disabled, I have been successful in my scientific work. It is a waste of time to be angry about my disability. One has to get on with life, and I haven't done badly. People won't have time for you if you are always angry or complaining. So while that story ends, what happened to our statement? Our statement was Stephen Hawking married his nurse after his divorce. So if you dig up a bit into his life, you will find out that it is actually true. So he was married to his first wife for some 30 years. They had 3 children, but it ended in divorce. And after the divorce, he was married to his caretaker, the nurse. All right, folks. So very interesting stories of inspiration of what great scientists have been able to do with their personal lives, not just the science that they've brought to us. Okay, let's move to another story. And this one is about another lady and a great environmentalist, and she's with us still, and her name is Jane Goodall. And this is my statement, right? Jane Goodall's first stuffed toy was a teddy bear. Is that true or is it false? What does that have to do with anything? It has to do with a lot, but we've got to figure out, is it a true statement or is it false that Jane Goodall's first stuffed toy was a teddy bear? So who was Jane Goodall? And I am going to actually solve this puzzle right away so we could get into her life, since it has to do with something in her childhood. So Jane Goodall, right, a British lady, when she was just 1, her father gave her a gift of a stuffed toy. So was it a teddy bear? Is that true or false? It's actually false. He did not give her a teddy bear, but he gave her something which you have to ask yourself, is that which influenced the rest of her life? He gave her a stuffed chimpanzee. And she became a primatologist, and she's the world's leading expert on chimpanzees today. So at age 1, right, and it was her favorite toy. I'm going to share pictures of her with the stuffed toy. You can see that on the screen. And the toy's name was Jubilee. It was a stuffed chimpanzee, and guess what? She's 90 years old. These days, she's 90 years old today, and she still has it on her desk. So somewhere early on, I said that keep an eye on some of the threads through this story today about what happens in our childhood. So things that we are exposed to in our childhood could often have lifelong influence on us. So the toys we give our children, she had a chimpanzee and she was absolutely fascinated with it. So she came from a little impoverished background. She couldn't afford to go to college. She got an opportunity to go to Kenya or to Africa, and she moseyed along because it was her lifelong dream. You know, when you want something with a passion, life opens doors for you. I'm a firm believer in that, right? Where there were only walls. And she ran into a scientist by chance who was working with chimpanzees. He saw her enthusiasm and he asked her to go and spend some time with them. And the work that she did, she is the first person to bring to the world's attention that that chimpanzees, their behavior patterns, that they actually use tools. Hey humans, wake up, news alert, you are not the only animal life on planet Earth that uses tools. So did chimpanzees, and that they were not all vegetarian. And these were the things that people believed. So without a college degree, she's actually one of the first persons in to be able to be awarded a PhD from Cambridge without a college degree because of the work and the power of the work that she was doing. And in those days, and it's just several decades ago because she's 90 right now, they would not allow her to go to Tanzania on her own. They said it was not safe for a young woman to be going there alone. And therefore, her mother accompanied her. So the support of the family. And we saw that with Marie Curie. 2 sisters made a pact to support each other's ventures. Her mother went with her on these journeys where she learned to live with them, and she gave the chimps names. And today she's a huge advocate for environmental issues. And so she had gotten her childhood dream of being able to work with them. So her story, which Jane Goodall's first stuffed toy was a teddy bear, is actually false. Her first toy was a chimpanzee, a stuffed chimpanzee. I end with a quote from her, and she said, "My family has very strong women. My mother never laughed at my dream of Africa, even though everyone else did, because we didn't have any money, because Africa was the dark continent, and because I was a girl. So for any girls out there who are listening to me, right, these are great stories of inspiration of what passion and a dream can, how far it can take you in life. So don't stop dreaming. All right, so folks, that's, I think, going to give me just about time to do one last story. The last story in my series, Stories from Science, and it's one very dear to my heart because it's actually about one of my friends. And this is the statement. This is simply the statement: Wanda Diaz Merced is a blind astronomer. Is that true, or is it false? Okay, so we're going to get into it. We'll get into who is Wanda Diaz Merced. Okay, so she is an astronomer, but is she a blind astronomer, right? We have to try and figure that out. And as I mentioned, this is a colleague and a dear friend of mine. She loves to refer to me as her sister because she's from Puerto Rico. And we both share a passion for astronomy in the Caribbean. So what is Wanda's story? So she was born in Puerto Rico, and as a child, she played games pretending to fly a spacecraft to another galaxy. Here we go again. Our childhood experiences and intrigue that we see and where it leads people to. She won a prize at a school science fair, and that made her feel that I would love to have a career in science. And today's final episode, final story is all about inspiration. Now, well, you will see where the story is going to go. As a teenager, Wanda started to lose her sight. So we can go to the statement right away. Wanda Diaz Merced is a blind astronomer. It's actually true. And her vision began to get less and less. And by the time that she was doing her degree at the University of Puerto Rico, she was actually totally blind. And what do you do then? She decided she was going to continue pursuing her degree, and it took her a lot of effort, and it took her actually 6 years, right? More than it might take a normal student, a sighted student, to be able to complete their degree. But complete her degree, she did. And then chance happenings, that's another thread right through our story. A friend of hers played an audio recording of a solar flare. And that made her realize, that inspired her to study astronomy. And do you know what Wanda does? She turns light into sound. So now the world of astronomy is open to blind persons. You see, when you think astronomy, you think of it as a visual science. You must see it. But here you could use that science where you turn the intensity, the brightness, the colors into sound, and someone who is not sighted can now experience it. She has made the statement that they can pick up things that sighted people cannot. So today she's known all over the world for her work in sonification. She's got TED Talks. Check her out. As I said, she's a dear friend of mine. And I close off our series. I close off our final story with a quote from her. And she says, "I have to study, study, study. I am very determined. If I can do it," meaning science, "anyone can." So folks, this brings us to the end of our episode, our series on stories from science, and today's topics were all about stories of inspiration. I hope somewhere that you've enjoyed some of it, and I thank you for the opportunity, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank IETV and all the marvelous people who work here, who have had the vision and given this opportunity to bring science to your homes. So thank you, folks, and it's over and out from me, Professor Sharon Hack, and have a wonderful one. Take care. Bye-bye.